My son cut me off after 30 years. Told me I was a burden he couldn't afford. 3 days later, I won 12 million in the lottery. What I did next changed both our lives forever, but not in the way you might think. My name is Harold Patterson, and I'm 68 years old. For most of my life, I thought I knew what love looked like. I thought it was sacrifice, giving everything you had, being there no matter what. I was wrong. Love, real love, isn't about testing someone's loyalty when they're down. It's about trusting them even when you're afraid. This is the story of how I almost lost my son forever, and how 12 million taught me the difference between being needed and being loved. I raised Michael alone from the time he was 12. His mother, my beautiful Eleanor, died in a car accident on a rainy Tuesday evening in November 1997. She was coming home from her book club, humming along to some song on the radio, when a drunk driver ran a red light. The doctors said she didn't suffer. They always say that, don't they? As if those words could somehow cushion the blow of losing the person who made your world make sense. Michael was in 7th grade then, all knees and elbows, and that awkward voice that cracked at the worst possible moments. The night we buried Eleanor, he crawled into bed with me, something he hadn't done since he was maybe 6 years old. We both cried until we had nothing left, and then we held on to each other like we were the only solid things in a world that had suddenly gone liquid. I made a promise that night, to Eleanor and to Michael. I would be everything he needed. Father, mother, cheerleader, disciplinarian, confidant. I turned down the promotion at the accounting firm that would have required travel. I stayed in our small house in Millbrook instead of taking the job in the city that paid twice as much. Every decision I made was filtered through one question: what's best for Michael? I drove him to every baseball practice, even when my back ached from hunching over spreadsheets all day. I learned to braid hair for his girlfriend's homecoming corsage because Eleanor wasn't there to teach him. I stayed up until 2 a.m. helping him with calculus, even though I hadn't touched advanced math in 20 years. When he got his heart broken by Sarah Weinstein junior year, I held him while he cried and told him that the right girl would see how special he was. College was a stretch on my salary, but we made it work. State loans, part-time jobs, and me picking up weekend tax prep during busy season. When Michael graduated with his business degree, I sat in those hard plastic chairs at the ceremony and felt like I'd accomplished something real. Eleanor would have been proud. We'd done it together, Michael and I. We'd built something good from the wreckage of that terrible night. Michael found work at a marketing firm in the city, started dating a lovely girl named Sarah who laughed at his dad jokes and actually seemed to enjoy my stories about his childhood. When they got engaged, Michael asked me to help pick out the ring. We spent a Saturday afternoon going from jewelry store to jewelry store, me offering opinions on cut and clarity while Michael fretted about carat size and payment plans. "Dad," he said as we sat in the car outside the 4th store, a small velvet box in his hands, "I couldn't have done any of this without you. You know that, right?" I did know, and it felt good to be needed, to be the foundation he'd built his life on. The wedding was everything Eleanor would have wanted. Small, intimate, held in the garden behind the church where we'd been married 25 years earlier. I walked Sarah down the aisle because her father had passed the year before, and when I placed her hand in Michael's, I saw my boy, my son, becoming a man who would take care of someone the way I'd taken care of him. They bought a small house 30 minutes away, close enough for Sunday dinners, far enough to feel independent. I helped with the down payment, of course. What's money for if not to help your children build their lives? Things started changing gradually, the way shadows lengthen so slowly you don't notice until suddenly it's dark. At first, it was small things. Michael would forget to call on Sundays. The weekly dinners became bi-weekly, then monthly. When I'd call, conversations that used to last an hour were suddenly 15 minutes of polite updates before he'd have to go. Sarah needed help with something, or they had plans, or he was just tired from work. I told myself it was natural. He was building his own family now. Sarah was pregnant with their first child, and they were busy painting nurseries and reading parenting books and doing all the things young couples do when they're about to become 3 instead of 2. But the distance felt intentional sometimes. When I'd show up with groceries or a casserole I'd made, I'd catch them exchanging glances. When I'd offer to help with yard work or babysitting, there was always a reason why it wasn't necessary. Sarah would smile and thank me, but her eyes would dart to Michael like she was checking for permission to accept. The grandchildren came, first Emma, then 2 years later, little James. Beautiful children with Michael's stubborn chin and Sarah's green eyes. I wanted to be the grandfather who told stories and taught them to fish and slipped them candy when their parents weren't looking. But every visit felt choreographed, planned down to the minute. I was welcome, but on a schedule. "Dad, you don't need to come over every weekend," Michael said one Sunday as I was loading the dishwasher after dinner. "We're fine." "Really? I know you're fine," I said. "I just like being here. I like being part of your lives. You are part of our lives. But maybe we could space things out a little more. Give us some room to breathe." Room to breathe. As if my presence was suffocating them. Eleanor had been gone for 15 years, but I still felt her absence like a phantom limb. Some mornings I'd wake up and reach for her side of the bed before remembering. Some evenings I'd start to tell her about my day before catching myself talking to an empty kitchen. I tried dating a few times over the years. Well-meaning friends would set me up with their widowed sisters or divorced coworkers. Nice women with kind smiles and their own stories of loss. But it never felt right. How do you explain to someone that your heart is already full, even if the person who filled it is gone? Michael used to worry about me being alone. He'd encourage me to get back out there, to find someone to keep you company. But as the years passed and he got busier with his own life, those conversations stopped. Maybe he was relieved that I wasn't bringing anyone around to complicate the family dynamic. Or maybe he just stopped thinking about my loneliness altogether. Retirement made it worse. 42 years of getting up at 6 a.m., putting on a tie, driving to the office, solving other people's financial problems, and then suddenly, nothing. The days stretched out like empty highways. I'd find myself calling Michael more often, just to hear another voice, just to feel connected to something that mattered. "How's work?" I'd ask. "Fine, Dad." "Same as yesterday." "And Sarah? The kids?" "Everyone's fine." "Dad, I'm actually in the middle of something. Can I call you back?" He never did call back. Or if he did, it was days later, after I'd already called him again. The breaking point had been building for months. I could feel it in the way Michael's jaw tightened when I'd suggest getting together. I could see it in Sarah's forced smiles when I'd show up with gifts for the children. I could hear it in the careful politeness that had replaced the easy warmth we used to share. I started keeping track of our interactions in a small notebook, not to be obsessive, but because I was trying to understand what was happening. March 15th. Called Michael. Conversation lasted 8 minutes. March 22nd. Stopped by with cookies for Emma's school party. Stayed 20 minutes. April 3rd. Invited them for Easter dinner. Told they already had plans with Sarah's family. The pattern was clear, even if I didn't want to see it. I was becoming the obligation they felt guilty about neglecting, not the father and grandfather they looked forward to seeing. The loneliness was eating me alive. Some days I'd go to the grocery store just to have conversations with the cashiers. I'd strike up lengthy discussions with bank tellers about the weather, anything to feel like I existed in someone else's day. I'd find myself following young fathers and their children through the park, remembering when Michael was small enough to need me to push him on the swings. I know now that I was suffocating them, though I couldn't see it then. I thought love meant being involved, being helpful, being present. I didn't understand that sometimes love means stepping back, even when it feels like you're disappearing. The night everything fell apart was a Thursday in late April. I'd been having one of those days where the silence in my house felt aggressive, where even the television couldn't fill the emptiness. I tried calling Michael twice that week and gotten voicemail both times. So I decided to drive over, maybe catch him when he got home from work, see if we could grab dinner somewhere. I should have called first. I know that now. But in the moment, it felt natural. For 25 years, I'd been welcome in my son's life without an appointment. The idea that I needed permission to see him felt foreign, wrong. I pulled into their driveway at 6:30 p.m. and noticed the extra cars immediately. Sarah's BMW, of course, and Michael's truck, but also a silver Lexus I didn't recognize and a red Honda that looked expensive. Through the front window, I could see people moving around the dining room. The good china on the table, candles lit. A dinner party. They were having a dinner party, and I hadn't been invited. I sat in my car for 5 minutes, trying to decide what to do. I could leave, pretend I'd never been there. But the thought of going home to my empty house, of microwaving another sad frozen dinner while they laughed with friends over Sarah's homemade lasagna, was unbearable. I knocked. Michael answered the door wearing the navy button-down I'd bought him for Christmas, his face cycling through surprise, irritation, and resignation in the space of a heartbeat. Dad. Hi. What are you doing here? Behind him, I could see the dining room full of people I didn't recognize. Young couples, probably friends from work or the neighborhood. The kind of people who talked about wine pairings and vacation homes and their children's soccer leagues. The conversation had stopped when the doorbell rang, and now 6 sets of eyes were looking toward the front door with polite curiosity. I was in the neighborhood, I lied. Thought I'd see if you wanted to grab a bite somewhere. Dad, we're kind of in the middle of something here. Oh, I looked past him at the dinner party, at the life he was living that didn't include me. I can see that. I'm sorry, I should have called. It's okay, it's just, maybe next time? And I should have left then. Should have smiled and apologized and backed away from a situation I'd stumbled into uninvited. But something in me cracked. Maybe it was the way he was standing in the doorway like a bouncer, his body language making it clear I wasn't welcome inside. Maybe it was seeing all those strangers sitting at the table where I used to have Sunday dinner. Maybe it was just the accumulation of months of feeling like I was slowly being erased from his life. Who are they? I asked, nodding toward the dining room. Friends from work. Sarah's book club. Just people. Just people. People who got invited to dinner parties while his father stood on the porch like a door-to-door salesman. Dad, seriously, this isn't a good time. When is a good time, Michael? Because I've been trying to reach you for days. His jaw tightened. I've been busy. Too busy for a 5-minute phone call. Yes, actually. Sometimes I am too busy for a 5-minute phone call. The honesty of it hit me like a slap. Behind him, I could hear Sarah's voice, bright and strained. Everything okay out there? Fine, Michael called back. Then, quieter, to me. Dad, can we do this later? Please. Do what later? Talk to my son. Make sure you're okay. Care about your life. Care about my life. His voice rose slightly. Dad, you don't care about my life. You want to be part of my life. There's a difference. The words hung between us like smoke. In the dining room, the conversation had resumed, but I could tell people were listening, trying to be polite while a family drama unfolded in their host's doorway. I don't understand the difference, I said. I know you don't. That's the problem. Michael stepped onto the porch and pulled the door mostly closed behind him. When he spoke again, his voice was tired, like he'd been having this conversation in his head for months. Dad, I love you, but I can't do this anymore. The constant phone calls, the unexpected visits, the way you make me feel guilty for having a life that doesn't revolve around you. It's suffocating. Suffocating. The word felt like a medical diagnosis. I'm suffocating you. Yes, and I've tried to be patient because I know you're lonely, and I know losing Mom was hard. But Dad, it's been 15 years. You have to find a way to live your own life instead of trying to live mine. Inside the house, someone laughed at something, a bright sound that felt like mockery in the context of our conversation. Your mother died, I said, my voice getting louder despite my efforts to control it. I lost the person I planned to grow old with. You're all I have left, Michael. You and Sarah and the kids. You're my family. No, Dad. We're part of your family. But we can't be your whole family. We can't be responsible for filling the hole Mom left behind. The truth of it was like a punch to the stomach. Because that's exactly what I'd been asking them to do, wasn't it? I'd been trying to make them into the thing that would make me feel whole again. I don't know how to do that, I admitted. I don't know how to live without needing you. Michael's expression softened slightly, but his resolve didn't waver. Then you need to figure it out. Because I can't be your whole world, Dad. It's not fair to me. It's not fair to Sarah and the kids, and honestly, it's not fair to you either. Through the window, I could see Sarah hovering near the dining room, probably wondering if she should rescue Michael from this conversation or let it play out. So what are you saying? I asked. You want me to just disappear? I'm saying I need space. Real space. Time to miss you instead of feeling obligated to manage your loneliness. Space. I repeated the word like I was learning a foreign language. How much space? Michael ran his hand through his hair, a gesture he'd inherited from me. I don't know, Dad. A while. Maybe a long while. Define a while. Don't call me every day. Don't show up unannounced. Don't make plans for us without asking first. Don't. He paused, searching for words. Don't make me feel like I'm failing you just because I have my own life. Behind us, the front door opened, and Sarah appeared, her face carefully neutral. Everything okay out here? She asked again, though clearly everything was not okay. Dad was just leaving, Michael said. And there it was. The dismissal I'd been dreading for months, finally spoken out loud. I looked at Sarah, hoping for some kind of intervention, some indication that she disagreed with Michael's assessment. But her expression was sympathetic without being inviting. She felt sorry for me, but she didn't want me to stay any more than he did. I see, I said. Well, I'm sorry for interrupting your dinner party. I hope you have a lovely evening. I turned to leave, but Michael caught my arm. Dad, I'm not trying to hurt you. I'm trying to save us. Both of us. I looked back at him, this man I'd raised, this person I'd built my life around, and felt something fundamental shift between us. I lost your mother, I said quietly. Please don't make me lose you too. Michael's face crumpled slightly, but he didn't change his position. You're not losing me. But you might if you don't learn how to love me without needing me so much. I drove home in silence, my hands shaking on the steering wheel. When I got to my house, I sat in the driveway for 20 minutes, looking at the windows where no light waited for me, listening to the engine tick as it cooled. For the first time since Eleanor died, I felt truly alone. The silence that followed was different from any silence I'd ever experienced. It wasn't the peaceful quiet of a Sunday morning or the comfortable hush of reading together in the same room. This was the silence of amputation, of something vital being severed, and the space it left behind refusing to heal over. 3 months. That's how long it lasted. 93 days of no phone calls, no text messages, no unexpected visits from grandchildren wanting to show me their latest drawings or tell me about their day at school. I know the exact number because I kept track, marking each day on the kitchen calendar like a prisoner counting down a sentence. At first, I waited for him to call. Surely after a week or two, he'd realize he'd been too harsh. Surely he'd miss our conversations, even the stilted ones. Surely one of the children would ask about Grandpa Harold, and he'd remember that I was part of their lives too. But my phone stayed silent. I tried to fill the days with purpose. I cleaned the house from top to bottom, organized closets that had been perfectly organized for years, read books I'd been meaning to get to since retirement. I started going to the senior center on Wednesdays for their poker games, though the other men's easy camaraderie only emphasized how disconnected I felt from everyone. The hardest part was the habits. For 25 years, I'd structured my days around being available for Michael. Now I'd catch myself reaching for the phone to call him about some news story I'd seen or some memory that had surfaced, only to remember that he didn't want to hear from me. I'd start to plan what I'd cook for Sunday dinner before remembering that Sunday dinners were over. I tried to be angry. Anger felt more manageable than hurt. I'd pace around the house, working up indignation about ungrateful children and the sacrifices I'd made that apparently meant nothing. But the anger never stuck. How could I be mad at him for wanting what I'd tried to teach him his whole life? Independence, self-reliance, the ability to build his own happiness. By the second month, I'd fallen into a routine that felt like survival. Wake up at 6 a.m. because my body had been doing it for 40 years and saw no reason to stop. Coffee and the morning news. Crossword puzzle, though I'd always been terrible at them. A walk around the neighborhood, where I'd nod politely to neighbors who probably wondered why I looked so lost in my own life. Grocery shopping became an event. I'd stretch a 30-minute trip into 2 hours, reading labels meticulously, comparing prices on items I'd bought for decades, chatting with anyone who seemed inclined to conversation. The young mother with twins who always looked frazzled. The elderly man who shopped with a careful list written in shaky handwriting. The teenager working the checkout who made small talk about the weather. These brief interactions became lifelines, proof that I could still connect with people, even if the people who mattered most had decided I was too much to handle. Evenings were the worst. That's when the house felt largest, when the silence echoed off the walls like a challenge. I'd cook dinner for one and eat it standing at the kitchen counter, washing my plate immediately afterward to minimize evidence of my solitary existence. I'd turn on the television, but everything seemed to be about families. Sitcoms with wise fathers and grateful children, commercials featuring grandparents surrounded by loving relatives, news stories about family reunions and milestone celebrations. I started going to bed earlier and earlier, sometimes by 8 p.m., just to make the days shorter. The worst part was that I began to understand what Michael had been trying to tell me. In the silence, I could see how my need had probably felt like pressure, how my love had come with expectations attached. I'd wanted to be the center of his universe the way he'd been the center of mine, but he'd built a whole life, marriage, children, career, friendships, that didn't require my constant input to function. The question that haunted me was whether I'd loved him or needed him. And if there was a difference, how could I learn to do one without the other? Every Friday for 20 years, I'd bought the same lottery ticket. Same numbers. Eleanor's birthday, Michael's birthday, our wedding anniversary, and the date we brought Michael home from the hospital as a newborn. It wasn't about the money, really. It was a $5 ritual, a tiny act of hope in a week that might not have contained much else. The habit had started when Michael was in college and money was tight. Eleanor would joke that we'd win big someday and pay off his student loans in one fell swoop. After she died, I kept buying the tickets as a way of keeping her memory alive, of maintaining this small connection to the dreams we'd shared. But during those 3 months of silence, the weekly trip to Murphy's Corner store felt different. Less hopeful, more desperate. Like maybe if I won something, anything, it would change the trajectory of my increasingly hollow days. The morning of July 15th started like every other Friday. Coffee, crossword, morning walk. At 10 a.m., I drove to Murphy's, where Mrs. Chen had been selling me lottery tickets for 2 decades. The usual, Mr. Patterson? She asked, though she was already pulling the ticket from the machine. The usual, I confirmed, handing over my $5. She handed me the ticket with the same smile she'd given me hundreds of times before. This could be the one, she said, the same thing she said every week. Could be. I agreed, tucking the ticket into my wallet without looking at it. I drove home, put the ticket on the kitchen counter next to my keys, and forgot about it for the rest of the day. Saturday evening, I was in my recliner with a book I wasn't really reading when the lottery drawing came on TV. Normally I'd flip the channel, but some combination of boredom and habit made me look up as they announced the numbers. Tonight's winning numbers are 15, 23, 31, 7, 42, and the Powerball number is 19. I almost didn't check. The ticket was still on the kitchen counter where I'd left it, probably a loser like every ticket I'd bought for 20 years. But something made me get up, walk to the kitchen, and pick up that little slip of paper. 15. That was Eleanor's birthday, May 15th. I had 15. 23. Michael's birthday, September 23rd. I had 23. 31. Our wedding anniversary, July 31st. I had 31. My hand started shaking as I looked at the next number. 7. The date we brought Michael home from the hospital, October 7th. I had 7. 42. Eleanor's age when she died. I had 42. The Powerball number, 19. The number of years Eleanor and I were married. I had 19. I stared at the ticket for a full minute, then looked back at the TV where they were repeating the numbers. I checked again, and again. Each time, the numbers matched. I had won the lottery. Not just when I had hit the jackpot. $12 million. The first emotion wasn't joy or excitement. It was disbelief so profound it felt like physical illness. I sat down hard at the kitchen table, the ticket trembling in my hands, and tried to process what had just happened. $12 million. After taxes, probably closer to 7 or 8 million, but still more money than I could spend in 3 lifetimes. More money than I'd ever imagined having. Enough to solve every practical problem I might ever face. Enough to buy security and comfort and peace of mind. But my first thought, my immediate, instinctive reaction, was, Michael will be so happy. Followed immediately by the crushing realization, Michael doesn't want to hear from me. I sat there in my quiet kitchen, holding the winning ticket to the biggest lottery prize in state history, and felt more alone than I had in the 3 months since our fight. Because what good was winning if you had no one to celebrate with? What good was money if it couldn't buy back the relationship you'd lost? Then came the second thought, darker and more complicated. How would I know if he was happy for me, or happy about what the money could mean for him? Michael had always been independent, proud, determined to make his own way. Even when I'd helped with college or the house down payment, he'd insisted on paying me back, keeping careful track of every dollar. But $12 million changes things. It changes how people see you, how they treat you, what they expect from you. If I called him now, if I shared this news, would his joy be genuine? Would he be excited because his father's problems were solved, or because his own financial pressures might be lifted? Would he suddenly have time for those phone calls he'd been too busy to return? The question felt like a test I didn't want to take. But once it occurred to me, I couldn't let it go. I needed to know if Michael would care about me without the money. I needed to know if the love was real, or if it had always been conditional on what I could provide. So I made a decision that would change everything. Instead of calling my son to share the best news of my financial life, I decided to call him with the worst news I could imagine. I was going to find out, once and for all, what his love was really worth. The plan took shape over several sleepless nights. I'd tell Michael I was in financial trouble, not just minor money problems, but the kind of devastating loss that could leave an elderly man homeless and desperate. It would have to be believable, complete with documentation and urgency that couldn't be ignored. I started with research. Online forums for seniors who'd been scammed, financial ruin stories from the local newspaper, government websites about investment fraud. I needed to understand how people actually lost their life savings, what the emotional trajectory looked like, what kind of help they needed, and when. The story I settled on was both simple and devastating. I'd been contacted by someone claiming to be a financial advisor who promised exceptional returns on pension investments. Like many seniors who'd been targeted, I'd been drawn in by the promise of security, of finally having enough money to stop worrying about the future. The scammer had gained my trust over months of small, successful transactions before convincing me to invest my entire retirement savings in what turned out to be a non-existent company. To make it believable, I actually moved my money. Not to scammers, obviously, but into new accounts under a trust structure that my actual financial advisor helped me set up. We labeled it as asset protection, which wasn't entirely a lie. I was protecting the money from my own impulse to reveal the truth too soon. The paperwork was disturbingly easy to fake. A few hours with photo editing software gave me official-looking documents from premier investment strategies, complete with forged signatures and realistic-looking financial statements. I created email correspondence with David Kellerman, my supposed advisor, full of promises and reassurances that would make any senior feel confident about their investment. Then came the harder part, creating evidence of the scam. Fake bank statements showing the money leaving my accounts. Printed emails showing my growing panic as David stopped responding to my calls. A real-looking police report generated from a template I found online, documenting my attempt to file charges against a man who didn't exist. The whole process made me feel sick, not just because I was lying to my son, but because I was imagining the genuine fear and desperation that real scam victims experience. Every fake document I created represented someone's actual nightmare, but I told myself it was temporary, that the truth would come out eventually, and that what I learned would be worth the deception. I couldn't call Michael directly. 3 months of silence had made that impossible. Instead, I reached out to Tom Brennan, a mutual friend who'd known Michael since high school. Tom was a good man, the kind of person who'd relay a message without asking too many questions, especially if he thought someone was in genuine trouble. "Tom, it's Harold Patterson," I said when he answered the phone. My voice was shaky, which wasn't entirely an act. "I'm sorry to bother you, but I didn't know who else to call." "Harold? Jesus, you sound terrible. What's wrong?" "I've made a terrible mistake, Tom. I'm in serious trouble." I told him the story I'd rehearsed, the investment scam, the lost money, the eviction notice I'd received that morning. I made my voice crack when I mentioned how embarrassed I was, how stupid I felt for falling for something that seemed so obvious in hindsight. "My God, Harold, how much did you lose?" "Everything. My savings, my pension, everything. The lawyer says there's no chance of getting it back." "Have you told Michael?" "We haven't been speaking." The truth of that statement made it easier to sound genuinely pained. "We had a falling out a few months ago. I've been too proud to call him, and now, I don't know if he'd even take my call." Tom was quiet for a moment. "Harold, whatever happened between you two, Michael would want to know about this. He'd want to help." "I hope so, but I can't call him myself. Could you? Would you mind reaching out? Just to let him know what's happened? I'm not asking him to fix it. I don't want him to hear about this from someone else if word gets around town." Tom promised to call Michael that day. After we hung up, I sat in my kitchen, staring at the fake eviction notice I'd created, and wondered if I was making the biggest mistake of my life. The hours between Tom's call and Michael's response were among the longest of my life. I'd told Tom I was staying at a motel, another lie, because I couldn't bear to be in the house where I'd made such a foolish decision. In reality, I was pacing my own living room, checking my phone every few minutes, rehearsing what I'd say when Michael called. If he called. By evening, I was starting to wonder if he would call at all. Maybe the 3 months of silence had killed whatever concern he felt for my well-being. Maybe he decided that my financial problems were just another attempt to manipulate him into contact. Maybe Tom had decided it wasn't his place to get involved in family drama. Then, at 8:47 p.m., my phone rang. Michael's name on the caller ID. I let it ring 3 times before answering, trying to sound like a man who'd given up hope of hearing from his son. "Hello, Dad?" Tom called me. "He said you're in trouble." Michael's voice was careful, controlled, but I could hear the concern underneath. It gave me hope and made me feel guilty in equal measure. "Michael, I didn't think you'd call." "Of course I called. Are you okay?" Tom said something about an investment scam. I launched into the story, making my voice shake with embarrassment and fear. I told him about David Kellerman, about the promises that seemed too good to be true but weren't, about the gradual trust building that led to my catastrophic decision to invest everything. I described the horror of realizing I'd been scammed, the police report that would go nowhere, the eviction notice that meant I had a week to find somewhere else to live. Michael listened without interrupting. When I finished, there was a long pause. "Dad, why didn't you call me sooner? When this first started happening, why didn't you ask for advice?" The question I'd been dreading. Because the real answer was that I hadn't been scammed at all, and the Harold Patterson who actually would have been scammed probably would have called his son immediately. But I couldn't say that. I was ashamed, I said instead, which wasn't entirely a lie. "And after our fight, I didn't think you'd want to hear from me. Especially not to tell you I'd done something so stupid. Dad, whatever happened between us, I never wanted you to suffer alone. You should have called." The genuine pain in his voice made my chest tight. "I know. I was trying to handle it myself. I thought maybe I could fix it somehow. And now I'm out of options. The eviction notice gives me a week to find somewhere else to live. I've looked into senior housing, but the waiting lists are months long, and I can't afford the deposits anyway." Another pause. I could almost hear him thinking, calculating, probably running through his own financial situation in his head. "Dad, I can't solve this whole thing, but I can help. Sarah and we've got some money saved. Not enough to replace everything you lost, but enough to get you into a decent place temporarily. And maybe we can figure out a longer-term solution." Relief and guilt hit me simultaneously. Relief that he still cared enough to offer help. Guilt that I was manipulating that love to test its authenticity. "Michael, I can't ask you to do that. You've got your own family to think about. You're not asking. I'm offering. And you're part of my family too, Dad. I know things have been complicated between us, but that doesn't mean I want you living on the street. I don't know how I'd ever pay you back. Let's worry about that later. Right now, let's just get you somewhere safe." We talked for another 20 minutes, working out logistics. Michael would drive up tomorrow to help me find temporary housing. He'd bring enough cash to cover first month's rent and a deposit somewhere decent. We'd look into legal options for recovering some of the lost money, though we both knew the chances were slim. When we hung up, I sat in my kitchen holding the phone, feeling like the worst person alive. Michael had responded exactly as I'd hoped he would, with immediate concern and practical help, no questions asked about whether I deserved it. He was willing to sacrifice his own financial security to help his father, even after months of silence, even after our bitter fight. And I was testing that love like it was a lab experiment. Michael arrived the next morning looking tired but determined. I met him at a coffee shop downtown, having told him I was too embarrassed to have him see me at the motel where I was supposedly staying. When he walked in, my first thought was that he looked older than he had 3 months ago. There were lines around his eyes that I didn't remember, and he moved with the careful posture of someone carrying stress in his shoulders. "Dad," he said, pulling me into a hug that felt both familiar and hesitant. "I'm so sorry this happened to you." Sitting across from him at a small table by the window, I watched him pull out a manila folder with printouts from apartment websites, phone numbers for senior housing facilities, and a handwritten list of questions he'd prepared about my financial situation. "I did some research last night," he said, spreading the papers between us. "There are a few places that might work temporarily. They're not fancy, but they're clean and safe, and the rent is reasonable." He'd done homework. While I'd been concocting my elaborate deception, he'd spent his evening after work looking for ways to help me rebuild my life. "Michael, you don't have to." "Yes, I do," he interrupted gently. "I should have called you weeks ago. I've been thinking about our fight, and while I still believe we needed some space, I handled it badly. I should have checked in, should have made sure you were okay. The guilt was overwhelming. You're not responsible for my mistakes. Maybe not. But I'm responsible for being your son. And sons don't let their fathers face something like this alone, no matter what. We spent the morning visiting 3 different apartments. Michael asked practical questions about lease terms and utilities, took pictures of the spaces, and treated each landlord with the kind of respectful professionalism that made me proud, even as it made me feel terrible about deceiving him. The apartment we settled on was a modest 1-bedroom in a complex that catered to seniors. It had good lighting, a small kitchenette, and a view of a courtyard where residents sat on benches and played chess. The rent was $800 a month, not cheap, but not unreasonable. The deposit is 2 months up front, the landlord explained. So $2,400 to move in, plus first month's rent. $3,200 total. I watched Michael's face as he processed the number. I knew from my years of helping with his finances that $3,200 was a significant expense for him, probably most of his emergency fund, maybe more. But he didn't hesitate. "We'll take it," he said. Over the next few days, I watched my son make sacrifices I hadn't anticipated. He took time off work to help me move my belongings. I'd rented a storage unit and filled it with furniture from thrift stores to make the story believable. He drove me to appointments with a legal aid lawyer to discuss options for recovering the stolen money. He helped me set up utilities and cable in the new apartment. But it was the small things that really got to me. When we went grocery shopping for my new place, I noticed him checking prices carefully, choosing generic brands, putting back items that weren't essential. At the pharmacy, when I mentioned needing help affording my heart medication, he quietly added the cost to his mental tally of expenses he was taking on. "Michael, I can't let you pay for everything," I said as we stood in the pharmacy line. "It's temporary, Dad. Just until we figure out what benefits you're eligible for, what legal options we have." But I could see the stress in the way he checked his phone constantly, probably monitoring his bank balance, calculating how long he could sustain this level of financial support. That evening, when he thought I wasn't listening, I heard him on the phone with Sarah. "No, we can't do the kitchen renovation this year. Dad needs help right now. I know we've been planning it, but this is more important. I don't know how long, Sarah. However long it takes." The next morning, I saw him at a Cash for Gold store, selling a watch his grandfather had given him for graduation. That afternoon, Sarah called me directly, the first time she'd initiated contact in months. "Harold, how are you holding up?" "I'm managing. Michael's been wonderful." "He has. Maybe too wonderful." Her voice was gentle but tired. "Harold, I need you to know something. Michael took out a personal loan to help with your expenses. He didn't tell you because he didn't want you to feel worse than you already do." My stomach dropped. "How much?" "Enough that we're going to be tight for a while. I'm not telling you this to make you feel guilty. Well, maybe a little guilty. But mainly I'm telling you because I want you to understand what you mean to him. Even after the fight, even after months of not talking, you're still his priority." After she hung up, I sat in my fake apartment, surrounded by furniture I didn't need, holding documents for a crime that had never happened, and realized I'd gotten my answer. Michael loved me. Not my money, not what I could provide for him, but me. He was willing to go into debt to help his father survive a financial catastrophe, even when that father had pushed him away. The test was over. Michael had passed with flying colors. So why did I feel like such a failure? Living the lie became harder every day. Michael called every morning to check on me, stopped by every few days with groceries, or just to visit. He'd help me set up the apartment with care, making sure I had everything I needed to be comfortable. But watching him sacrifice for something that wasn't real was eating me alive. I saw him selling things to support me. Not just the watch, but golf clubs he'd saved for, a leather jacket I'd bought him for Christmas years ago. I heard him on phone calls with bill collectors, rearranging payment schedules to free up money for my expenses. I watched him get thinner, more tired, as he worked extra hours at his job to make up for the money he was spending on me. The worst part was seeing how the financial stress was affecting his family. Emma's dance classes stopped. James's baseball league registration was put on hold. The family vacation they'd been planning was quietly canceled. Sarah took on extra shifts at her part-time job, coming home exhausted and trying to hide her frustration. And through it all, Michael never complained. Never suggested that helping me was a burden. Never made me feel like my crisis was inconveniencing his family. He just quietly rearranged his life to accommodate mine. 2 weeks into the charade, I almost broke. Michael had brought dinner, takeout from a cheap Chinese place instead of the nice restaurants they used to frequent, and was telling me about Emma's school project. She's doing a family tree for history class, he said, unpacking containers of fried rice and sweet and sour chicken. She asked if she could interview you about great-grandpa Patterson's farm. That would be nice, I said, though the thought of lying to my granddaughter made me feel sick. She's been asking about you a lot lately, wondering why you live in this apartment now instead of the house. I told her you needed a change of scenery, but she's smart. She knows something's wrong. I watched him serve the food onto paper plates we'd bought at the dollar store and saw how carefully he portioned it out, making sure there would be leftovers for my lunch tomorrow. Michael, I started, then stopped. I couldn't find the words to confess what I'd done. I know this is hard, Dad. I know you feel like you've lost your independence, your security. But it's going to be okay. We're going to get through this together. Together. He kept using that word, even though together meant he was sacrificing everything while I sacrificed nothing. That night, I called the lottery office to confirm my winnings were still secure. They were, sitting in an account I could access any time I wanted to end this nightmare. But ending it meant admitting what I'd done, and I wasn't sure Michael would ever forgive me for testing his love this way. 3 weeks into the deception, Michael called a family meeting. Not with me, but with Sarah and the kids. I only found out about it because I overheard him on the phone making arrangements with Sarah's mother to babysit. We need to talk about the long-term plan, he said. Figure out how we're going to make this sustainable. The meeting was at their house the next evening. I wasn't invited, but Michael called me afterward to fill me in on what they'd decided. Dad, we've been thinking. This arrangement, you in the apartment, us helping with expenses, it's not working for anyone. You're isolated, we're stretched thin financially, and the kids barely see their grandfather anymore. My heart started racing. Were they about to cut me off? Tell me I was on my own? What are you saying? We're saying you should move in with us. Temporarily. We can convert the den into a bedroom, and you'd have your own space, but still be part of the family. It would save money on rent, and honestly, I think you'd be happier. Move in with them. The exact thing I'd been longing for before our fight, now offered as a solution to a crisis I'd invented. Michael, I can't impose on your family like that. You're not imposing. You're family. And Dad, I've been thinking about our fight, about what I said that night. I was angry and stressed, and I said things I didn't mean. I pushed you away when you needed support, and now this happened, and I can't help but think if we'd been talking, if I'd been paying attention, maybe you wouldn't have been vulnerable to this scam in the first place. He was blaming himself. My son was taking responsibility for my made-up financial disaster because he thought his distance had contributed to my vulnerability. That's not your fault, Michael. Maybe not entirely, but I could have been there for you. I should have been checking in, making sure you were okay. Instead, I was so worried about maintaining boundaries that I forgot about maintaining our relationship. The invitation was genuine, generous, and completely undeserved. They were offering me everything I'd wanted: daily contact with the grandchildren, inclusion in their family routines, a chance to be useful and needed, and they were offering it at a time when they could least afford the disruption. Let me think about it, I said, because I couldn't say yes to something based on such a massive lie, but I couldn't say no without hurting him all over again. 2 days later, Sarah showed up at my apartment alone. It was the first time she'd visited, and she looked around the small space with an expression I couldn't read. It's nice, she said, though we both knew it wasn't. Cozy. It's fine for now. Michael said you all discussed me moving in. You don't have to do that, Sarah. I know it would be a big adjustment. She sat down on the second-hand couch Michael had helped me buy. Harold, can I be honest with you? Of course. When Michael first told me about your situation, I was angry. Not at you, but at the timing. We've been struggling more than we've let on. Michael's been working overtime for months just to keep up with the mortgage and the kids' expenses. We'd been planning to refinance, maybe take some equity out to do the kitchen renovation. But then this happened, and now we can't afford to take on more debt. I felt sick. Sarah, if I'd known you were struggling financially, that's just it. You wouldn't have known, because Michael wouldn't have told you. He's too proud. And after your fight, he was carrying around all this guilt about cutting you off. So when you needed help, there was no question in his mind that he'd provide it, no matter what it cost us. She paused, looking out the window at the courtyard where elderly residents were playing cards in the afternoon sun. Harold, I'm not telling you this to make you feel bad. I'm telling you because I want you to understand what you mean to Michael. He sold his grandfather's watch to help pay your deposit. He's been eating peanut butter sandwiches for lunch to save money. He canceled his life insurance policy to free up the monthly payment. My hands were shaking. I didn't know. He didn't want you to know. But Harold, I need you to also understand what this is doing to our family. Emma asked me last week why Daddy looks sad all the time. James has been having nightmares about monsters, and I think it's because he can sense the stress in the house. Michael tries to hide it, but he's barely sleeping, and when he does sleep, he grinds his teeth so hard I'm afraid he's going to break them. Tears were starting to form in my eyes. What do you want me to do? I want you to move in with us. Not because we can afford it, we can't, really, but because Michael needs to know you're okay. He needs to stop carrying this worry around like a backpack full of rocks. And honestly, I think you need us too. You look lonely, Harold. You look like you're disappearing. She reached over and took my hand. We're family. Families take care of each other, even when it's hard. Especially when it's hard. After she left, I sat in my fake apartment and realized I'd created a test that had no good ending. Michael had proven he loved me by sacrificing his family's financial security. But continuing the test meant watching him destroy himself, trying to save me from a disaster that didn't exist. For the first time since I'd won the lottery, I understood what I had to do. That night, I couldn't sleep. I lay in the narrow bed in my temporary apartment, staring at the ceiling and listening to the sound of my neighbors through the thin walls. Mrs. Chun from next door was watching her evening talk shows. The couple upstairs was having their nightly argument about money. Down the hall, someone was crying, soft, muffled sobs that made my chest ache. I thought about Michael grinding his teeth in his sleep. I thought about Emma asking why her daddy looked sad. I thought about Sarah working extra shifts to make up for the money Michael was spending on me. I thought about James having nightmares while his parents whispered about bills and budgets in the next room. My test had become torture. Not just for me, but for the people I loved most in the world. At 3 a.m., I got up and made coffee I didn't want. I sat at the small table by the window and watched the empty parking lot, trying to figure out how to end this without destroying what was left of my relationship with Michael. Because that was the real trap I'd built for myself. Michael had proven his love beyond any doubt. But when he found out how I'd proven it, by lying to him, manipulating his emotions, watching him sacrifice his family's well-being for a crisis that didn't exist, would that love survive? I wanted to know if he loved me without the lottery money. Now I was about to find out if he could love me after knowing what I'd done to test that love. The coffee grew cold in my hands as I made my decision. I couldn't let this continue. Whatever the consequences, I had to tell him the truth. But first, I had to figure out how to tell a story this complicated without sounding like a man who'd lost his mind. I spent the next day gathering evidence of my deception. The fake documents I created, the lottery ticket, the bank statements showing where the money really was. I wrote out a timeline of everything that had happened, from the night of our fight to the moment I decided to test his love. I wanted to be able to show him exactly how the lie had been constructed, so he'd understand it wasn't a momentary impulse, but a calculated plan. The hardest part was writing the letter I wanted to give him first, before the explanations and evidence and justifications. I went through a dozen drafts before settling on something that felt honest. Michael, by the time you read this, you'll know that everything I've told you about the investment scam was a lie. There was no David Kellerman, no stolen money, no financial crisis. I won $12 million in the lottery the week after our fight, and instead of calling you to share the good news, I decided to test whether you would help me if I had nothing to offer you. You passed the test in ways I never imagined. You sacrificed your financial security, your peace of mind, and your family's comfort to help a father you thought was desperate and alone. You proved that your love is real, unconditional, and more generous than I ever deserved. But in passing my test, I failed as your father. I don't know if you can forgive me for what I've done. I don't know if I deserve forgiveness. But I need you to know that every day of this deception has been agony, not because I was living a lie, but because I was watching the best person I know sacrifice everything for someone who was lying to him. You are a better man than I raised you to be. You are a better man than I am. I love you. I'm sorry. And I understand if you never want to see me again. Dad, I called Michael at 6 p.m. on a Thursday, knowing he'd be home from work, but before the kids' bedtime routines began. Hey, Dad. How are you feeling today? Michael, I need to see you. Tonight. Can you come to the apartment? Something in my voice must have alarmed him. Are you okay? Do you need me to take you to the hospital? I'm not sick, but I need to talk to you about something important. Something that can't wait. Okay, let me just tell Sarah I'm heading out. I'll be there in 20 minutes. Michael. Yeah, Dad. Bring Sarah. She should hear this too. The 20 minutes between that phone call and their knock on my door were the longest of my life. I paced the small apartment, rehearsing what I was going to say, trying to imagine their faces when they realized what I'd done. When they arrived, they looked worried but prepared to handle whatever crisis I was about to present them with. Michael had brought a notepad, probably thinking we needed to discuss logistics or medical issues. Sarah carried her purse and a bag of crackers, the kind of snacks she brought when she expected to be somewhere for a while. They sat on the couch across from me, holding hands in that unconscious way couples do when they're facing something difficult together. Dad, what's going on? Michael asked. You sounded scared on the phone. I handed him the letter first. Read this. Both of you. And then I'll explain everything. I watched their faces as they read. Confusion first, then disbelief, then a dawning realization that shifted between hurt and anger and something that might have been relief. When they finished, Sarah looked at me with an expression I couldn't read. Michael just stared at the letter in his hands. You won the lottery, he said finally. $12 million. The night after our fight. And instead of calling me, I tested you. I wanted to know if you'd help me if I had nothing to give you in return. Michael stood up and walked to the window, his back to me. Sarah watched him, then looked back at me. Harold, she said quietly, do you have any idea what the last month has been like for us? The silence in the room was different from any silence I'd experienced. It wasn't the quiet of people thinking or the pause before someone speaks. It was the silence of something breaking, clean and final. Michael turned from the window, and the look on his face was something I'd never seen before. Not anger, exactly. Something colder. You watched me sell my grandfather's watch. It wasn't a question. Yes. You let me take out a loan. Yes. You let me cancel Emma's dance classes. James's baseball. Our vacation. Each statement hit like a physical blow. Yes. Sarah stood up, her hands shaking slightly. Harold, Michael hasn't slept through the night in 3 weeks. He's been having panic attacks about money. I've been working double shifts and coming home to find him at the kitchen table with a calculator, trying to figure out how to make our budget work. I know. I'm sorry. You're sorry. Michael's voice was still quiet, but there was something sharp underneath it. Dad, I thought you were going to be homeless. I thought you might end up on the street, hungry, sick, alone. Do you know what that felt like? Knowing my father was suffering and I might not be able to do enough to help him. I tried to speak, but he continued. I called in favors at work to get time off. I lied to my boss about why I needed advances on my paycheck. Sarah and I fought about money for the first time in our marriage because we were both scared and stressed and didn't know how to handle it. Michael, I researched lawyers for you. I called elder abuse hotlines. I spent hours online trying to figure out if there was any way to get your money back from scammers who didn't exist. Sarah sat back down, tears in her eyes. The kids know something's wrong. Emma asked me if we were poor now. James has been hoarding snacks in his room because he's afraid there won't be enough food. The full weight of what I'd done was finally sinking in. I hadn't just tested Michael's love. I'd traumatized his entire family. I'd made his children afraid of poverty, made his wife question their financial security, made him doubt his ability to take care of the people he loved. I wanted to know if you loved me, I said weakly. You wanted to know if I loved you? Michael's voice rose for the first time. Dad, I called you every day. I rearranged my entire life to help you. I was willing to go into debt for you, to sacrifice my family's comfort, to give up everything I could give up to make sure you were okay. What more proof did you need? Michael sat down heavily in the chair across from me, looking suddenly exhausted. How long were you planning to let this go on? He asked. I was going to tell you tonight regardless. I couldn't watch you sacrifice anymore. So, if we hadn't had the conversation about me moving in with you, you would have just let me keep paying for your fake crisis? I didn't answer because we both knew the truth. I might have let it continue longer if I hadn't seen how badly it was affecting his family. Sarah leaned forward. Harold, I need to understand something. When you saw what this was doing to us, the stress, the financial strain, the effect on the children, what did you feel? Guilty. Terrible. Like I was making the biggest mistake of my life. But not guilty enough to stop it immediately. No. Not until I realized how much damage I was doing. Michael was staring at his hands. Dad, do you understand that this wasn't just about testing my love? You made me prove that love by hurting my family. You made me choose between taking care of you and taking care of them. And then you watched me choose you. The truth of that hit me like a physical blow. I didn't think of it that way. Of course you didn't. Because you were so focused on your own fear and loneliness that you couldn't see past them. Sarah reached over and took Michael's hand. What do we do now? She asked. Michael looked at me for a long moment. I don't know. I honestly don't know. I stood up and walked to the small kitchen where I'd laid out all the evidence of my deception. The fake documents, the lottery ticket, the bank statements showing where the money really was. The money is real, I said, bringing the papers back to the living room. $12 million. After taxes, about $7 million. It's sitting in accounts I can access anytime. Michael looked at the lottery ticket, then at the bank statements. Jesus, Dad, this is all real. The only thing that was fake was the crisis. Everything else, the numbers, the win, the money, it's all real. Sarah was studying the bank statements. So when you were asking Michael for help, when we were all tightening our belts and making sacrifices, you had $7 million in the bank. Yes. She was quiet for a long moment. Then, Harold, I think you need to understand something. This wasn't just about testing Michael's love. This was about control. What do you mean? You were angry that he'd set boundaries with you. Angry that he'd asked for space. So you created a scenario where he had to choose between his principles and your well-being. You forced him back into a relationship on your terms. The accusation hung in the air. I wanted to deny it, but the more I thought about it, the more I realized she might be right. Maybe, I admitted. Maybe that was part of it. Michael stood up again, this time moving toward the door. I need to go home. I need to think about this. Michael, wait. What about the money? I can pay back everything you spent, everything you sacrificed. I can pay for Emma's dance classes, James's baseball, your vacation. I can. Dad, stop. His voice was tired. This isn't about money. This was never about money. This is about trust. And I don't know how to trust you anymore. Sarah followed him to the door, then turned back to me. Harold, Michael is going to need time to process this. We both are. Please don't call us for a while. Don't show up at the house. Give us space to figure out how we feel. How long? I don't know. As long as it takes. After they left, I sat in my fake apartment, surrounded by evidence of my deception, and realized I'd gotten the answer to my original question. Michael did love me, unconditionally and generously. But now I had a new question. Could that love survive what I'd done to test it? The silence that followed was different from the 3 months before our fight. That silence had been about distance and hurt feelings. This silence was about broken trust and betrayal. I moved back to my real house the next day, abandoning the apartment that had been the stage for my deception. Being back in my own space should have felt like relief, but instead it felt like evidence. Every room reminded me of the loneliness that had driven me to such desperate measures. I tried calling Michael after a week. The phone went straight to voicemail. I tried again 3 days later with the same result. I sent a text message apologizing again, explaining that I understood why they needed space, but asking if there was any way we could talk. No response. After 2 weeks, I drove by their house. Michael's truck was in the driveway, but when I knocked on the door, no one answered. I could see shadows moving behind the curtains, hear the television in the background, but they weren't ready to see me. I started seeing a therapist. Dr. Martinez was a kind woman in her 50s who specialized in family therapy and grief counseling. I told her the whole story, the fight, the lottery win, the test, the revelation. She listened without judgment, asking questions that helped me understand my own motivations. Harold, she said during our 3rd session, what do you think you were really testing? Whether Michael loved me. But you already knew he loved you. He'd shown you that love for 30 years, hadn't he? Yes, but I was afraid that love was conditional, that it was based on what I could provide for him. And what were you afraid of providing? What did you think the lottery money would change? The question stopped me cold. I guess. I was afraid he'd only want me around for the money. So you tested whether he'd want you around without the money. Yes. But Harold, by creating a crisis that required his help, you weren't testing unconditional love. You were testing conditional love. You were seeing if he'd love you on the condition that you needed him. The insight hit me like a revelation. I hadn't been testing whether Michael loved me unconditionally. I'd been testing whether he'd love me if I needed him to rescue me. Dr. Martinez helped me understand that the real question I'd been afraid to ask wasn't whether Michael loved me, but whether I was lovable as I was, without crisis or need or dependence. Before your wife died, she asked, how did you know Michael loved you? He called me. He visited. He included me in his life. And after she died, the same things, but they felt different. They felt like obligations. What changed? His behavior or your perception of it? I thought about that for a long time. My perception, I think. I started needing more proof that the love was real. And the more proof you needed, the more his natural expressions of love felt insufficient. That was exactly right. Michael had been showing me love the same way he always had. But my grief and loneliness had made me interpret those expressions as duty rather than genuine affection. So when he asked for space, Dr. Martinez continued, what did that feel like? Like he was confirming what I was afraid of, that he didn't really want me around, that he was just going through the motions. And the test was your way of forcing him to prove his love in a way that felt more real to you. But it wasn't more real. It was manipulated. Exactly. You created an artificial situation to generate genuine emotion. But the emotion was genuine all along. You just couldn't see it through your own fear. The sessions helped me understand what I'd done, but they didn't solve the immediate problem. Michael still wasn't speaking to me. The grandchildren didn't know why Grandpa Harold had disappeared from their lives again. Sarah was caught in the middle of a situation she hadn't created, but was suffering from anyway. 3 weeks into the silence, I got a text message from Sarah. Michael isn't ready to talk, but I think you should know Emma is asking about you. She's worried because she heard us arguing about whether to tell the kids what happened. She thinks she did something wrong. The thought of Emma blaming herself for my absence was unbearable. I texted back, can I see her? Just to let her know she didn't do anything wrong. Sarah's response came an hour later. Michael says no. He doesn't want to expose the kids to this situation until we figure out how to handle it. I'm sorry. That night, I sat in my kitchen and wrote letters I didn't send. To Michael, apologizing again and trying to explain my thinking. To Sarah, thanking her for her patience and asking her to tell the children I love them. To Emma and James, simple notes saying I missed them and hope to see them soon. But writing unsent letters wasn't fixing anything. If I wanted to repair this relationship, I was going to have to do something more than apologize. I was going to have to prove that I'd learned something from what I'd done. The idea came to me during my 4th session with Dr. Martinez. We were talking about making amends, and she asked me a simple question. Harold, what would meaningful change look like to your family? I'd been focused on apologizing, on explaining my motivations, on trying to make Michael understand why I'd done what I'd done. But I hadn't been thinking about what I could do differently going forward. I said slowly, they need to see that I can be okay on my own. That I don't need them to manage my loneliness or fix my problems. And what would that look like practically? That's when it hit me. I'd been using my money to test Michael's love, but I could use it to show him that I'd learned to love without testing. The next day, I started making changes. Real changes, not performances or manipulations. First, I called the senior center and asked about volunteer opportunities. Within a week, I was helping with their literacy program, teaching adults to read 2 afternoons a week. It felt good to be useful in a way that had nothing to do with my family's approval. Then I looked into grief counseling groups. There was one that met Wednesday evenings at the community center. People who'd lost spouses and were learning to build new lives alone. I'd avoided groups like this for 15 years, but sitting in that circle of folding chairs, listening to other people's stories of loss and recovery, I realized how much I'd been carrying by myself. I hired a financial advisor, a real one this time, to help me manage the lottery money responsibly. We set up charitable foundations, education funds for Emma and James that they'd access when they were adults, and a trust that would ensure I could live comfortably without ever being a financial burden to anyone. But the biggest change was internal. I started building a life that wasn't centered around my need for Michael's attention. I made friends at the senior center, people who knew nothing about my family drama and liked me for who I was in their presence. I took a cooking class and learned to make meals I actually wanted to eat, not just fuel to get through another day. I started reading again, not to pass time, but because the stories engaged my mind. After 2 months of silence and change, I wrote Michael one final letter. Not an apology this time, but an update. Michael, I'm not writing to ask for forgiveness or to try to convince you to see me. I'm writing to let you know what I've been learning about myself and what I'm doing differently. Dr. Martinez, my therapist, helped me understand that when I tested your love, I wasn't really afraid you didn't love me. I was afraid I wasn't worth loving unless I was needed. I was afraid that without a crisis to manage or a problem to solve, you'd have no reason to keep me in your life. I've spent the last 2 months learning to build a life that doesn't require anyone else's validation. I volunteer at the senior center, teaching people to read. I'm part of a grief support group where I'm learning that losing your mother doesn't have to define the rest of my relationships. I've made friends who don't know about the lottery money or the family drama. They just know Harold, who makes terrible jokes and always brings extra coffee to group meetings. I've also been thinking about what you said that night at the apartment, about how I made you choose between taking care of me and taking care of your family. You were right. I put you in an impossible position and then watched you sacrifice your family's well-being to prove your love for me. That wasn't a test of love, it was emotional blackmail. I don't know if you'll ever want to see me again. But if you do, I want you to know that I'm not the same man who created that false crisis. I'm learning to be someone who can love without testing, who can be loved without needing constant proof. The lottery money is being managed responsibly. I've set up education funds for Emma and James that they'll access when they're adults, not as a way to buy back your affection, but because grandparents should invest in their grandchildren's futures. I've also established a foundation that provides emergency financial assistance to families dealing with actual crises, because I learned firsthand how devastating it can be when someone you love faces financial disaster. If you're not ready to see me, I understand. Take as much time as you need. But if you ever want to try again, I'm here. And more importantly, I'm okay here. I don't need you to rescue me from my loneliness anymore, because I'm not drowning in it the way I was before. I love you. I'm proud of the man you are and the father you've become. And I'm sorry it took me so long to learn how to love you without making it your burden to carry. Dad, Emma's education fund will fully cover college and graduate school at any university she chooses. James's fund will do the same. This isn't contingent on anyone's relationship with me. It's just what grandfathers do when they're fortunate enough to be able to do it. I mailed the letter on a Thursday and tried not to count the days until I heard back. 6 days after I sent the letter, my phone rang. Michael's name on the caller ID. I let it ring twice before answering, my heart pounding. Hello, Dad? It's Michael. I got your letter. I wasn't sure you'd read it. I read it. Twice, actually. Sarah read it too. There was a pause. I could hear noise in the background. Children playing, the television, normal family sounds that I'd missed more than I'd realized. Dad, can we talk? In person? Of course. When? Tomorrow? Can you come for dinner? Just don't expect everything to be normal right away. We're still figuring this out. I understand. Should I bring anything? Just yourself. The real version this time. After he hung up, I sat in my kitchen and cried. Not from sadness, but from relief so profound it felt like a physical release. He was willing to try again. I arrived at Michael's house at exactly 6 o'clock, carrying nothing but a small gift for each of the children. Books I'd picked out carefully, not expensive, but chosen with thought for their individual interests. Sarah answered the door with a careful smile. Hello, Harold. Sarah, thank you for letting me come. We'll see how it goes, she said, but not unkindly. The children ran to me the way they always had, as if the 2 months of absence had been 2 days. Emma showed me a drawing she'd made in art class. James demonstrated a magic trick he'd learned from a library book. For a moment, it felt like coming home. But then I saw Michael's face. He was watching me interact with his children with an expression I couldn't quite read. Not angry, but careful. Evaluating. Dinner was spaghetti and meatballs, simple and perfect. The conversation was careful at first, updates about work and school, safe topics that didn't venture into dangerous territory. But gradually, it became more natural. Grandpa Harold, Emma said during dessert. Why did you move to that apartment? Daddy said you needed a different place to live, but I liked your old house better. The table went quiet. This was the moment I'd been dreading and needing in equal measure. You know what, Emma? I made some mistakes. I wasn't thinking clearly, and I made choices that hurt people I love. Sometimes grown-ups do that, even when they don't mean to. Are you not making mistakes anymore? I'm trying very hard not to make the same mistakes again. But everyone makes mistakes sometimes. The important thing is learning from them and trying to do better. Michael was watching this exchange intently. When Emma accepted my answer and went back to her ice cream, he gave me a small nod that felt like approval. After dinner, while Sarah was putting the children to bed, Michael and I sat on the back porch. The October air was crisp, and the yard was full of fallen leaves that needed raking. "Dad," he said finally, "I want to understand what happened. Not the mechanics of it. I understand how you faked the crisis. But I want to understand why you thought you needed to." I'd been preparing for this conversation for weeks. I was lonely. But more than that, I was afraid that if I wasn't needed, I wouldn't be wanted. When you asked for space, it confirmed every fear I had about being a burden you were trying to manage rather than a father you actually wanted in your life. So you created a situation where I would have to need you. I created a situation where I could watch you choose me over your own comfort. But Michael, I realize now that was unfair. You shouldn't have to prove your love by sacrificing your family's well-being. He was quiet for a long time, looking out at the yard where he'd taught his children to throw a ball the same way I'd taught him. "Dad, the thing that hurt the most wasn't the lying. It was that you didn't trust the love that was already there. You'd rather test it than believe it. The truth of that hit me squarely. You're right. And I'm sorry. I know you are. But sorry doesn't undo the stress Sarah went through, or the nights I couldn't sleep, or the way the kids absorbed our anxiety, even when we try to hide it. What can I do to make amends? Real amends, not just words." Michael looked at me directly for the first time all evening. "Keep doing what you're doing. Keep building a life that doesn't require us to manage your emotions. Keep being someone we want to spend time with, not someone we feel obligated to rescue." It was a fair request, and we both knew it. And Dad, if you ever feel that lonely again, if you ever start questioning whether we love you, promise me you'll just ask. Don't test us. Just ask. I promise. The phone rang on a Saturday morning in April. I was in my kitchen making pancakes for one, reading the paper, enjoying the kind of quiet Saturday that had once felt like a prison, but now felt like peace. "Good morning, Dad. What are you up to today?" "Making breakfast, reading about the mayor's budget proposal. You know, exciting stuff. What about you?" "Emma has a soccer game at 10. Want to come watch?" The invitation was casual, not loaded with the desperation that had characterized my interactions with Michael for so many years before our fight. He was asking because he thought I might enjoy it, not because he felt guilty about not including me. "I'd love to. Should I meet you there?" "Actually, why don't you come here first? We can all ride together." An hour later, I was sitting in the stands with Sarah, cheering as Emma ran up and down the field with the determined concentration of a 7-year-old who had just learned that soccer was about more than picking flowers in the grass. James sat between us, alternating between watching his sister and reading a book about dinosaurs. "She's getting good," I told Sarah as Emma successfully stole the ball from an opponent. "She's been practicing every day. Michael's been working with her on footwork." It was a normal conversation between in-laws watching a child's soccer game. No underlying tension, no careful navigation around sensitive topics. Just family being family. After the game, we went for ice cream. Emma ordered a sundae with extra cherries. James got a chocolate cone that was almost as tall as he was. Michael and Sarah shared a banana split. I got a single scoop of vanilla and felt completely content. "Grandpa Harold," James said, chocolate ice cream on his nose. "Are you happy now?" The question was innocent, the way children's questions often are, but it stopped me cold. "Yes, buddy. I'm happy now." "Good. Daddy was worried about you being sad." I glanced at Michael, who was studying his ice cream with sudden intensity. "I was sad for a while," I told James. "But I learned how to be happy again." "How?" "I learned that being happy isn't something other people can do for you. It's something you have to figure out for yourself." 6 months after our reconciliation, I invited Michael and Sarah to tour the offices of the Patterson Family Foundation. We'd rented space in a downtown building, hired a small but dedicated staff, and begun the work of providing emergency financial assistance to families facing genuine crises. "This is where we process applications," I explained, showing them through the main office where 3 caseworkers reviewed requests for help. "We get about 50 applications a week. Everything from medical bankruptcies to house fires to job losses." Sarah paused at a bulletin board covered with thank you letters from families we'd helped. "Harold, this is incredible. How do you decide who to help?" "We prioritize families with children, people facing eviction or foreclosure, and anyone dealing with medical emergencies. The goal is to provide enough help to stabilize their situation while they work on longer-term solutions. Michael was looking at the financial reports our accountant had prepared. Dad, you're giving away $1 million a year. About that, yes. It's what I can afford to give while still living comfortably and maintaining the education funds for Emma and James. The foundation had become my way of transforming the guilt I felt about my deception into something constructive. Every family we helped reminded me of what genuine financial crisis looked like, how it affected not just the adults but the children who absorbed their parents' stress and fear. There's something else I want to show you, I said, leading them to a smaller office in the back. This is going to be the counseling center. The room was still being renovated, but the plans were clear, a space where families could receive not just financial help but emotional support as they worked through their crises. We're hiring therapists who specialize in financial trauma and family stress, I explained, because I learned that money problems aren't just about money. They're about fear and shame and feeling like you've failed to protect the people you love. Michael was quiet, taking in the scope of what I was building. Dad, he said finally, this is really something. You're going to help a lot of people. I hope so. But more than that, it's helping me. Every day I come here, I remember that real crises exist. Real families suffer when they lose their financial security. It keeps me grounded in reality instead of getting lost in my own fears. As we left the building, Sarah took my arm. The first physical affection she'd shown me since before the deception. Harold, I'm proud of you. Not just for the foundation, but for the work you've done on yourself. Thank you. That means more than you know. We walked to our cars in comfortable silence. As I was getting into mine, Michael called my name. Dad, Sunday dinner tomorrow? Nothing fancy, just family. I'd love that. And I meant it. Not because I needed Sunday dinner to feel loved, but because I genuinely enjoyed spending time with my family. The difference, I'd learned, was everything. The envelope arrived on a Tuesday morning in July, exactly 1 year after I'd won the lottery. Inside was an invitation to Emma's 8th birthday party, a pool party at Michael and Sarah's house with handwritten decorations and a request to please bring swimming clothes if you want to get in the water with us. I hadn't been swimming in years, but I bought swim trunks anyway. The party was perfect chaos. A dozen 8-year-olds running around the backyard, jumping in and out of the pool, eating cake and pizza, and working themselves into the kind of sugar-fueled frenzy that makes parents simultaneously exhausted and happy. I sat in a lawn chair in the shade, watching Emma show off her diving skills to her friends, and felt something I hadn't experienced in years, complete contentment. Not the desperate gratitude of someone who'd been welcomed back from exile, but the simple pleasure of being part of something good. You look relaxed, Sarah said, settling into the chair next to me. I am. This is nice. It is. And Harold? Thank you. For what? For becoming someone we could trust again. For doing the work to rebuild rather than just expecting us to forget what happened. I watched Michael in the pool with James, teaching him to dive like I'd once taught Michael. 3 generations of Patterson men, each learning from the one before, each making his own mistakes and hopefully learning from them too. Can I tell you something? I said to Sarah. Of course. I'm grateful for what happened. Not the pain I caused you all, but the fact that it forced me to change. I was becoming someone I didn't like. Desperate, needy, manipulative. Losing your trust was the wake-up call I needed to become someone better. Sarah considered this. I'm glad you can see it that way. But Harold, you didn't have to nearly destroy your relationship with Michael to learn those lessons. You could have chosen to grow without hurting people first. She was right, and we both knew it. But sometimes the truth you need to hear only becomes audible after you've made the mistakes that force you to listen. You're right. But I'm grateful anyway. For the chance to be better, and for your willingness to let me try again. Emma ran over, dripping wet and grinning. Grandpa Harold, are you coming in the pool? I looked down at my dry clothes, then at her expectant face. You know what? Yes, I am. I jumped in the pool fully clothed, which sent Emma into delighted laughter and earned me mock outrage from Michael about getting water on the pool deck. But for the first time in longer than I could remember, I felt like myself. Not the lonely widower, not the manipulative father, not the lottery winner. Just Harold, who could still make his granddaughter laugh by doing something slightly ridiculous. Later that evening, after the party guests had gone home and the yard had been cleaned up, Michael and I sat on the back porch while Sarah got the children ready for bed. Dad, can I ask you something? Anything. Do you ever regret winning the lottery? It was a question I'd never expected, but I knew the answer immediately. No, not the winning. But I regret what I did with it initially. The money itself isn't good or bad. It's just a tool. The question is what you use it for. And what are you using it for now? I thought about the foundation, about the families we'd helped, about the education funds that would give Emma and James opportunities I'd never dreamed of. I thought about the freedom it gave me to volunteer, to build relationships based on genuine connection rather than financial need. I'm using it to build something bigger than myself, and to make sure that the people I love have choices, even if those choices don't include me. Michael nodded slowly. That's the difference, isn't it? Between needing someone and loving them. I think so. Love wants the other person to be happy, even if that happiness doesn't require you. Need wants the other person to need you back. We sat in comfortable silence as the sun set behind the trees in his backyard. Somewhere in the house, I could hear Emma and James protesting bedtime with the half-hearted resistance of children who'd had a perfect day and were too tired to fight very hard. Dad, yeah, I love you. And I'm glad you figured out how to love us back without making it hurt. I looked at my son, this man I'd raised, who taught me as much about love as I'd ever taught him, and felt the kind of peace that only comes from knowing you've found your way back to what matters. I love you too, Michael. All of you. And I'm glad you gave me the chance to learn. The next morning, I woke up in my own house, made coffee for one, and checked my phone. A text from Michael. Thanks for jumping in the pool yesterday. Emma hasn't stopped talking about it. I texted back. Thanks for inviting me. See you Sunday for dinner. Always, came his reply. And I knew he meant it. Not because he had to. Not because I'd tested his loyalty or manipulated his emotions or created a crisis that required his attention. He meant it because love, real love, is something you choose every day. And for the first time in my adult life, I understood the difference between being chosen and being needed. My name is Harold Patterson. I'm 69 years old. I won $12 million in the lottery, and I almost lost my family testing whether they would love me without it. What I learned is that love isn't about testing. It's about trusting. It's not about being needed. It's about being yourself and discovering that's enough. The money gave me choices I'd never had before. But the real gift was learning that the people who matter most will choose you back, not because they have to, but because they want to. And that, I've discovered, is worth more than all the lottery winnings in the world. Thank you for joining me on this journey. If you liked this story, please like this video, subscribe to the channel, and share your thoughts in the comments below. And remember, the best relationships aren't built on tests, but on trust. The best love isn't proven through crisis, but through the simple choice to show up for each other, day after day, in all the ordinary moments that make a life.